Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 24th of June, 2024. That's quite a mouthful. Welcome to today's UK column news. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, and I'm delighted to have with me today Alex Thomson from the Netherlands and also Mark Anderson speaking from the USA. Now, I'll just say that it's a little bit of a gloomy day, June day here in Plymouth, England, as you might be able to see from the weather out the window behind me. But never mind, we're going to get on with a busy UK column news for our viewers and listeners today. So let's start off with Alex. Welcome. Great to have you back with us. And you've got something to report here. While many people were looking at what was happening in Crimea, Sevastopol, attacks by the Ukrainians in the last couple of days, there was something pretty dark and nasty happening in other parts of Russia.
Indeed, Brian. In fact, along the whole southern fringe of Russia in the Caucasus, this is the mountain range between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And there have been attacks at the western end, where the separatist Georgian Republic of Abkhazia suffered attacks in two places reportedly yesterday. But first we will look at what happened at the other end, the Caspian coast. This is the Russian Autonomous Republic of Dagestan, an extremely complicated, overwhelmingly Muslim republic with dozens of nationalities and languages in it, located just north of Azerbaijan along the Caspian coast. Over the last quarter century, it has experienced many overspills of the Chechen conflicts, the two wars at least that have come out of there. That has been kept a little under tabs recently, but just yesterday afternoon, a lady in the historic city of Derbent, not the capital of the Dagestani Republic, but the most historic town there, filmed this out of her window.
Я не знаю, что там происходит, но что-то очень глобальное. И после того, как ухнул гранатомет, по-моему, прям ухнул, вот эта штука горит. Не знаю, что это. Сука, дурдом, Махачкала.
What she managed to capture there was, unfortunately enough, the opening salvos of several attacks in the two biggest cities of Dagestan, not only there in Derbent, where a synagogue was attacked, but also in Makhachkala, the unpronounceable capital, administrative capital of Dagestan, which, as I say, is run autonomously, so it's local, overwhelmingly Muslim people in the government there facing attacks from militants of their own area, their own nationalities, who've often spent time in the Gulf or the West. Many people allege that they're being trained by interests in the West and reignited, possibly with a Ukrainian dimension in there as well, if you look at the spread of attacks and the coordination in time with Sevastopol. But here we'll see what happened in Makhachkala at the same time, an attack on a police station. Now, we could get a lot more gory than that, but it would be gratuitous, and we will not. But there is plenty of footage proving that when the Russian security forces managed to move in to both of these urban attack environments, they pumped a number of bullets into the already recumbent, if not lifeless, figures of the attackers. People may say this is not fair play and not Queensberry rules, but over the last 25 years, the Russians in the North Caucasus have found booby-trapped bodies and men playing dead and all kinds of other horrors, so I will not be the first to judge their response. At the end of the day, it turned out that there had been attacks not only on synagogues in these two towns, and here's one of silent footage of the synagogue in Derbent burning, but also an Orthodox cathedral in one of the districts of Makhachkala, the administrative capital, had also been surrounded. There were reports of dozens of hostages being kept by nightfall. A 66-year-old priest apparently had his throat slit. It's very difficult to get confirmations out of these zones, particularly Dagestan, and a guard in the other city, Derbent, guarding a church, armed only with a gas pistol, was reportedly killed. So here we have the last of the footage with sound from there, which is as night fell, the Russian security forces had surrounded the Cathedral of the Assumption in a suburb of Makhachkala, and there was a general shootout going on. So people are often quick to say false flag when they see such attacks. It has a long prior history in Dagestan of being real attacks, whoever was orchestrating them. I do not for 1 minute believe that these were staged by the Russians. And I think there is some preponderance of suspicion here that I wouldn't say people in Kiev, but people aligned with the Kiev war effort in other parts of the world may have pulled on some old strings that they keep alive there in order to set these men in motion. A very bloody day, and the next morning, this morning, we were seeing this kind of aftermath. So we'll just roll that as silent footage. I think if I need to click that again to start rolling it, and you will see there that there's been some blurring out of the corpses, but there's completely burnt out and shot up vehicles, rusting away there in the streets of Makhachkala and Dagestan. And this really could have the potential to reignite a civil war that the Russians thought several times over the last 25 years they had managed to put to bed with a combination of amnesties and hard actions. Here we see the interior of the cathedral after the siege was apparently relieved overnight. So reportedly a priest murdered in cold blood on the scene, as well as attacks on synagogues, and reportedly even a school set alight. I haven't seen much reporting on this, and we'll just close the segment by showing what happened at the other end of that mountain chain. The border between Russia and the not internationally recognized Abkhazia is the River Pso, and there was a shootout on that border. You can see the bullet hole in the vehicle reportedly from there, according to MASH. That attack suggests 1 dead and 1 injured. And there was in the interior of Abkhazia, in Novi Afon, a separate attack. The death total in the Dagestani attacks between those two cities I mentioned is reportedly 4 civilians and 15 police, including the police chief of one of the districts of Dagestan.
Alex, thank you very much. Is it a coincidence that that trouble has exploded on the scene at such a sensitive time in Ukraine, I wonder? But of course, we don't know the exact facts behind the incident, and we'll wait and see. Now, on the subject to Ukraine, I thought today I would give you an update, an overview in the limited time that we've got available. I started with the BBC. I find it very well, I was going to use the word amusing, but of course we can't be amused because this is about war. But Ukraine, of course, is now dropped to 6th place with occasional articles for the BBC. There's no comprehensive reporting of the progress of the battle. And I believe that this is because all the evidence shows that Ukraine is continuing to lose, and the BBC is unable to produce the propaganda material to counter that. But if we look in other directions, the information is constantly having us believe that all is going well on the battlefield for Ukraine. So the Kiev Post here, with Ukraine's use of Western weapons on Russian soil, becomes a game changer within hours of US approval. This is talking about the relaxations, or the supposed relaxation of rules on Western weapons, and particularly American weapons, to allow them to be used on Russian territory. But of course, this is not a game changer at all. It achieves a tactical success, but at the end of the day, it's not going to slow the strategic defeat which Ukraine is suffering. Here's another article from the Kiev Post. Ukrainian drone swarms swamp Russian air defenses, oil refineries, and airfield hit. Now, this is, of course, blatant propaganda again, although the Ukrainians did indeed achieve hits. What it hasn't done is destroyed strategic Russian infrastructure, and it certainly hasn't swamped Russian air defenses. So this is a tactical success, but it's, again, not going to slow the strategic defeat. Now, this is something else that's being reported here. We've got Russian troops cede ground and strike back, frustrating Ukraine's counteroffensives. And it says military analysts say the Russian commanders have been using a tactic known as elastic defense to prevent Ukraine from holding villages and other positions and staging grounds for future attacks. So basically, the Russians, when they come under attack, move back, allow the Ukrainians to move in. And then before the Ukrainians are settled, the Russians attack them. And this has been proving very effective. Here we've got another headline from RBC Ukraine. And this is now claiming that it's the Ukrainian military using the elastic band strategy to buy time before arms arrive. But the difference here is that this is retreat in action. The Ukrainians are retreating from positions into supposedly pre-prepared stronger positions, but the reality on the ground is often those rear defenses have not been produced properly, and therefore the Ukrainians are ultimately being beaten. So if we look at Ukraine at the moment and the elastic band defense, as it were, we can say at the moment Ukraine is outgunned at least 5-1 across the total front, and in many places it's well in excess of 5-1. Ukraine's air force largely destroyed. Ukraine's air defense is very weak. Resupply of Patriot, which the Americans are now saying they're going to concentrate on pulling in all their Patriot supplies and making sure they go to Ukraine, but this is actually going to be too few, too late. We've got Western ammunition and munitions in general. Their resupply efforts are just not enough. The Ukraine at the moment has unsustainable casualties, which have reached up to 2,000 killed and injured per day. And although they still have an army of about 600,000 to 700,000, this has been largely weakened by the large number of older and poorly trained troops, many of whom don't want to be fighting, so low morale is a feature. If we can also add in here that, of course, Ukraine has sustained massive infrastructure damage, which is preventing the production of in-house armour and weapons, and of course repair of damaged vehicles. If we look at the Russian side, Russia is operating a meat grinder, and Ukraine is losing ground across the front. That is a fact. Trained Russian forces now about 100,000 in Belarus, plus 700,000 committed to Ukraine. The Russian military production is increasing and outstripping the collective West. Russian drone production outstrips Ukraine, as does the electronic warfare weapons deployed. And Russia in the last 2 years has sustained missile attacks at about 4,000 strikes per year, which is truly astonishing. Russia can hit any target anywhere in Ukraine, and the Russian big bombs, this is the 500, the 1,500, and the 3,000 kilogram weapons, are wreaking havoc in the areas that they're being used. And Russia continues to smash Ukrainian strategic infrastructure, including the electricity generation, production, bridges, and assembly areas. Let's just have a look at this very short clip of former US Marine and nuclear inspector Scott Ritter talking about F-16s coming to Ukraine.
Promised F-16s from day one, and none have arrived. After last night, it's unlikely none will ever arrive. The Russians attacked 2 airfields that were being set aside for F-16 deployment. Just today, the news is coming out. There's just not that many Ukrainian pilots trained in F-16s, and there's hardly anybody trained to maintain them. The hero of the day is the squadron maintenance officer. He's the one that keeps the airplanes up and running together with the maintenance crews. And the Ukrainians don't have them. And the bottom line is, I don't believe there's going to be any F-16s going to Ukraine at all, ever. I think the war will end before a single F-16 gets off the ground. So I think they're going to just slow roll this thing. Their hope is that Russia will negotiate into this conflict in a manner which allows Ukraine to retain its military and its government. And once that ceasefire kicks in, then the F-16s will flood in so that they become a reality. Russia's not playing that game.
So it's not looking too good on the F-16 front. Let's have a look at this Russian weapon, very large bomb, 3,000 kilogram FAB bomb. And I've used a report from the Military Summary channel because it's a really excellent report on the power of this weapon. Let's have a look.
I'm going to talk about Kharkiv direction because the most important updates are coming from this territory. Today, the Russians used FAB 3000s for the second time. In this video, for example, we can see the former school that, according to the Russians, the Ukrainians were using as the, let's say, base or temporary deployment point, and as a result of FAB strike, the building was heavily damaged. Most likely, if there was somebody inside of the building, probably nobody is already inside of the building. This is the second strike. I'll remind you that yesterday the Russian sources published the first strike in the same area, a little bit in the northern direction, in the central part of Liptsy. Let's take a look at this video. In this video we can see another building. According to information we have, this is the former hospital, and some sources reported they managed even to discover some military trucks in the area, and as a result of FAB strike the building was also heavily damaged. Today, this morning, we got another video from the same area. Let's take a look at this, the last video from this direction about FAB. In this video we can see the movement of some soldiers in the area or some civilians who were filming the consequences of FAB 3000 attack, and exactly on this second we see a very big hole inside of the building, which confirms that most likely the building was completely reduced to ruins from inside.
So the key part of that report is, even though there wasn't a direct hit, the sheer power of that weapon destroyed what would be for the Ukrainians a fortified building with a very strong concrete structure. So not looking good on the battlefield at the moment. Alex, before we finish on Ukraine, or subject to the war in Ukraine, you've got a little bit here on the Slovak defense minister.
Slovakia is one of the countries that has a direct border with Ukraine, albeit a very short one. And until very recently, early 2023, it had a government which was more akin to the Polish line. There was agreement among the Visegrad neighbors on the west of Ukraine that Ukraine must be given everything in the arsenal of those countries. And duly, that government decided to grant the Ukrainians its entire fighter jet air force. Not the whole air force, but all the fighter jets. That was 13 MiG-29s. Now, under the government of Robert Fico, who is recovering from the assassination attempt that we covered recently, we have this development. Robert Kaliňák, the defense minister of Slovakia, and he's not just talking here, he's launched proceedings as well, has said that his predecessor in the previous government was a traitor for gifting the entire fighter jet force of Slovakia to Ukraine. So he's initiated a prosecution there, and he says that there is no other term than treason for weakening the armed forces in such a way contrary to the constitution. The Slovaks on the COVID front at the same time have, as we've reported, uniquely instituted a permanent committee of inquiry to find out what abuses were happening during COVID. So Fico's government seems to be taking this places. They already seem to have unearthed that the last government was perhaps telling porkies when it said it had got legal advice on the advisability of this move.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much. Mark, let's welcome you on to today's news. And do you think that a change in president in the States is going to make a difference?
That's always been the $1 trillion question in these United States, Brian. And good day, Alex, and listeners and viewers. The first presidential debate, Sound the Trumpets, is going to is coming up this coming Thursday, the 27th of June. There's going to be another one, I understand, September 10th. The first one by CNN, the second one by ABC News. The New Yorker, which the East Coast cognoscenti likes to read in the United States, had this report on it. And it's basically saying, I won't get into a lot of the details, but it's basically saying that who would have expected these guys to be on the same stage again? Trump has reportedly been convicted of all these counts supposedly paying hush money to a former porn star because they supposedly had a tryst. A lot of pro-Trumpers, of course, don't believe that tryst ever existed or ever happened. At any rate, the article tries to sort of dig into the sensationalism of the whole thing and says, what's going to become of all this? And viewers can freeze the slides if they want to get into all the details on this. We can move on from there. And the New Yorker goes on to say that, for example, in the debate this coming Thursday, for the first time since 1960, there's going to be no studio audience, and unless there's a direct question to either of the prospective candidates, then the microphone will be muted to avoid all sorts of feuding and what comes down to verbal mud wrestling, you might say. So they're bringing back some very old rules. One time, Donald Trump brought in some women that were accused of, or rather, former President Clinton was accused of having trysts with those women, and he brought some of those women into the studio audience. So they don't want things like that, and that played into when Trump was running against Hillary. But the next slide is where we really get into the important part of this, and that is, where is RFK Jr.? And this speaks to the larger picture of American politics, and today's report is kind of a good lesson for our largely British audience, though not completely British audience, to learn a little bit more about the woes and strange tidings in American politics. So RFK Jr., the question is asked here in this report, why didn't he qualify for the first presidential debate? Well, ABC News is saying the clock struck midnight on RFK Kennedy Jr.'s window to qualify for CNN's June 27 general debate, and the network formally announced that RFK Jr. won't make the stage. He didn't meet CNN's qualifications, which include, of course, being constitutionally eligible to be president, which means you must be at least 35 years of age, have at least 4 qualifying national polls with at least 15% support that meet CNN's guidelines, and having confirmed ballot access in enough states to potentially win a majority in the Electoral College, which is 270 electoral votes under the Constitution. Kennedy, ABC News noted, ultimately came up short on both polls, they're saying, and ballot access. They're also saying he lacked there in his bid to get a spot on the stage alongside Biden and former President Trump. Now, there's an interesting twist here. ABC goes on to say, but even though Kennedy didn't qualify, his legal challenge to the debate is still ongoing. In late May, Kennedy's campaign filed a complaint with the Federal Election Commission alleging that the CNN debate violates campaign finance law because, in effect, the network colluded with Biden and Trump, their campaigns, in planning the debate, and is supposedly using different ballot access rules for the two major party contenders compared with Kennedy. CNN has said that Kennedy's complaint is unfounded, and then ABC News says in its own volition, its own nation, all in all, it seems unlikely, although not impossible, that the FEC will intervene on Kennedy's behalf. But it gets deeper. We'll go from there. This is Kennedy's own campaign website. He announced his exclusion from the CNN debate stage is what he says undemocratic, un-American, and cowardly. And he was quoted as saying, RFK Jr., Presidents Biden and Trump do not want me on the debate stage, and CNN illegally agreed to their demand. RFK said, my exclusion, get this, by Presidents Biden and Trump from the debate is, as we said, undemocratic, un-American, and cowardly. Americans want an independent leader who will break apart the two-party duopoly. And this is interesting in the wake of the Independence Con in Austin, Texas, I covered a year ago. And some of this is the chickens are coming home to roost. At that conference, there was a lot of talk about why can't we get an independent party to even have a chance at being a congressman, let alone president, and so on and so forth. But what Kennedy is basically saying in his complaint is that a federal law has been flagrantly violated, and Kennedy is complaining that the media broadcasters are not using pre-established and objective criteria to determine candidate participation. Failure to use objective criteria, I'm reading more from the campaign website, renders the debate this a campaign contribution. So RFK Jr. is basically saying that by applying the matter in this way, at least in the indirect sense, CNN is making a campaign contribution to the two dominant party candidates at the exclusion of the independent Mr. Kennedy, and not using what Kennedy would call objective criteria. And RFK Jr. goes on to say, in release, CNN's published debate criteria require candidate's name must appear sufficient number of ballots to reach 270 electoral vote threshold. CNN is holding Kennedy to this requirement, but is not requiring Presidents Biden and Trump to meet this requirement by claiming they are each the presumptive nominee of a political party. He goes on to say CNN has persisted in this approach after the FEC made clear that the phrase presumptive nominee is not in the FEC's debate regulation, and therefore it cannot exempt CNN from the prohibition on excessive campaign contributions. So what's going on here in the bigger picture, Brian, is technically speaking, and I can flesh this out on the next slide, but technically speaking, Trump is not officially the nominee of the Republican Party, and Biden is not officially the nominee of the Democratic Party, because their conventions, their national conventions for their parties, have not taken place yet. But because Kennedy is an independent, he is the automatic nominee as an independent candidate. So Kennedy is claiming that he's going up against two guys that are not actually officially the nominees of their party. So why should he be excluded? That's what it boils down to. And a little bit on this slide that's up now, and we can begin to summarize this. CNN and its staff, RFK's campaign is proclaiming, are now on clear notice, especially given the damning evidence that the Biden campaign has openly demanded Kennedy be excluded from the debates, and Trump reports assurances from CNN that Kennedy will be excluded. Into compliance, RFK's campaign insists, CNN must apply its criteria objectively. Presidents Biden and Trump have not yet been nominated by their parties, and their names are not certified to appear on a single state ballot. And I think Kennedy is right about this. Kennedy, in contrast, has been certified to appear on the ballot of numerous states, including California, Delaware, Hawaii, Michigan, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Utah. See, these are the kind of things that the mass media cartel, the legacy mass media, doesn't really make clear. They'll just say that Kennedy has filed a suit, but you have to read Kennedy's own literature to really get this fleshed out and understand what's going on. This Associated Press slide, people can freeze this and read it for more details. But like ABC News, like CNN, Associated Press, which plays a big role in assessing and publishing the vote counts during major national elections, and is not always thought to be an objective party, they're calling RFK's campaign a long shot bid. They all want to call it a long shot bid. But the paradox, Brian, is always the same. They don't want to give a lot of ample coverage to RFK in terms of taking his campaign seriously. So automatically they kind of get the result they want, where Kennedy doesn't quite have all the polling. He doesn't quite get all the exposure, which would affect the polling. And so they try and dampen their coverage of RFK, whatever one may think of him. And then they act as if he's a long shot bid when they rig the news to make sure he's a long shot bid. And as I note here in summarizing this report, the Republican National Convention isn't until mid-July in Milwaukee, and the Democrat National Convention even later in latter August in Chicago, Illinois. Only then will Trump and Biden become the official candidates for their parties, again, while RFK already is in essence. And Lincoln Chafee, the former Rhode Island governor, had this to say, and this ties into the biased news coverage that automatically makes someone a long shot, and then the media wonders why they're considered a long shot. Chafee had this to say: if the American people could hear what all three candidates had to say about the critical issues facing our country, the choice between these men would be clear. In Chafee's estimation, Kennedy would become the 47th president of the U.S. And to wind this up, Brian, the real paradox is that traditionally the Democratic Party would do whatever they could to get a Kennedy on the ballot, given the Kennedy's legendary name in American politics, and run with him rather than Joe Biden, who just turned 81 years old recently. And there's a lot of questions about Biden's mental and physical competence, let alone his ideology and his policies. So you would think the Democratic Party would embrace having a Kennedy, given the history and legacy behind it. But instead, Kennedy is relegated to, you might say, the political ghetto, which is created by the media, of having to be an independent candidate and having to scrape his way through. So that's the huge paradox, and we can talk a little bit more about it in extra, Brian, but that's how it's shaping up.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. And as you talked about presidential elections, I was thinking about UK and independents and the smaller parties already telling us that they can't get into the hustings alongside the bigger parties. So exactly the same control over the election process is happening here in UK. Well, if you like what UK Column is doing, then please support us. Do become a member. Let's just jump back there. Apologies for that. Do become a member of UK Column at that £5 a month. You then become part of the key support of the column to allow us to do what we do. Of course, we also encourage people to share our material, and it's going out on these particular mediums. Facebook, we still got a problem with at the moment as some sort of engagement problem with Facebook, but we'll see what happens. You can also make a purchase in the UK Column shop. That would be really excellent. But I just want to bring us on to this one, and it's Mike's Agenda 21, Your Life in Their Hands, which we've already had a really good response to. This is a really excellent written document, and I would like to personally say to the UK Column audience, we would like every single UK Column member to purchase one of these brochures. The information is fantastic. It allows you to share it with people. But if we could get the participation of each and every UK Column member, this would give us a huge boost to produce more of this material, and of course to produce more video and audio, which many of you are asking us to do. So if you want to help the UK Column in 2024, please buy one of these reports, Agenda 21, Your Life in Their Hands. This could be a huge boost to the column, and you will be getting a very, very valuable report at the same time. Now, I'd also like to say that the UK Column Live, which we did Sunday the 16th of June, talking about us, everybody in the column and how we got here, that's now up on the UK Column website. It's broken down, so you can view it in set pieces instead of one big production. But if you have a look on the UK Column website, you'll find it. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we've got an interview going out, which is Mark Byford, the bowler hat farmer, and Charles Mallet is interviewing him. I understand that this is a really interesting and informative interview, so watch out for that one. Now, coming up this weekend, we've also got the Sounds Beautiful Festival in Dorset. That's 27th to the 30th of June. And of course, the UK Column team is going to be there. Lots of good music as well. We just like to say to you that Paul Terry and Mad Mix have collaborated in their production. It's Not Just a Heart Attack, and that will be coming out on YouTube as a premiere on Wednesday, and the single will be available on Friday. So if you're a music lover, watch out for that. But this is part of the beauty of getting together for music and talks and socialising. Now, big date for your diary is Saturday, the 19th of October, 2024. This is going to be at a good venue in Bristol, UK column team as a whole. It's going to be your opportunity to meet us in person and listen to some really good talks. So watch out for that one. We'll tell you more in due course. Now, let's move on to the subject really of the Daily Mail on Saturday. Caught my attention, and I decided unusually to buy one. Here's how the front page looked. So a lovely childish picture of the royal family, which is apparently a magical holiday snap. But it was the headline about Farage that caught my attention. Farage, the West provoked Putin. And in the text, this was what was being said. The reform leader was branded a danger to UK security over his extraordinary claim that NATO and the EU had provoked Vladimir Putin. On the election campaign trail, reform has gained support from veterans for pledges such as increased defence spending, a much bigger army and better housing for soldiers. But last night's comments could threaten that progress and provide a boost for the Conservatives. So the inference here is that all veterans are for war, and they apparently want to go to war with the Russians, which I don't believe for a moment. But this is the thread through this whole Daily Mail article. Now, when we got inside, it got into double-page spreads. Some of it was electioneering, but further attacks on Farage with this sort of commentary, if we bring it up. Farage said that he stood up in the European Parliament in 2014, and he said that and he quoted that there will be a war in Ukraine. He went on to say, it was obvious to me that ever eastwards expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving this man a reason to his Russian people to say they're coming for us again and to go to war. Now, that text is perfectly accurate. It's what the Daily Mail said. It is a bit strange, but that is the quote from Farage. So the whole point of the article was that everybody had to be supporting the war against Russia. And when we got deep into the paper, this is what we came across on page 10, but it's an article by Boris Johnson himself. And it said, unless Keir Starmer revokes his endorsement of a Corbyn premiership, he's simply not fit to be Prime Minister. And I took one quote out of the article itself, where Boris is saying, let us focus for a moment on one issue alone, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is the biggest and most savage war in Europe since 1945, in which tens of thousands of totally innocent Ukrainians have been killed because the criminal folly and miscalculation of one man, Vladimir Putin. Well, let's just, sorry to bring that in again, let's just pop in the label on that. Putin certainly did miscalculate because he trusted the West. And in particular, he trusted at one point Boris Johnson, or it appeared so, who was the man who destroyed peace talks. Alex, very, very quickly, let's just bring you in, if I may, for a bit of comment here, but I just find this obscene that the Daily Mail is focusing in on Boris Johnson, the man who destroyed the opportunity for peace in Ukraine.
You would have expected that the Daily Mail, given its profile and the target readership it goes for, would have more bones to pick with Johnson, his dishevelled, immoral carryings on in many ways. But apparently what has trumped that now is this attitude that no politician can warn of war, and no politician or public figure more broadly can say, I understand why our enemies felt provoked. And if you've crossed that bridge, then you might as well pack up shop and stop having Parliament and television and the newspapers. But that's the bridge that we seem to have crossed now, that to express understanding is regarded as tantamount to expressing undying support and sympathy for.
Indeed. Thank you for that. And I'll just say, of course, I have never been completely happy with Nigel Farage for a number of reasons, which I'm happy to talk about. But in this case, what was the Mail doing? The only view that you must have is that war against Russia in Ukraine is what all of us should be supporting. But I'd like to draw people's attention to the headline here, where, of course, we've got Boris Johnson. If we just play the little video clip here, what did the Daily Mail do? Well, it scrubbed him up. It tried to make him appear a respectable, trustworthy Tory thought leader to convince the Daily Mail audience that Boris is a man whose opinion we should follow. Let's just listen to the actual clip and hear him speaking and how he was speaking in that inset video.
Because if Ukraine falls, it will be a catastrophe for the West. It will be the end of Western hegemony, and we will have no one to blame but ourselves.
Well, I think we'll have Boris Johnson to blame, and if you really want to know why, have a look at him talking to the extreme Azov battalion. We've had this clip up on UK Column before, but I think we need to just pop it up on screen again.
Thank you to the heroes from the Azov Brigade who warned us about their presence tonight. Give the Ukrainians what they need. Give them the weapons, give them the authorization to use those weapons outside their own borders if necessary. Now, absolutely ludicrous that Ukrainians should be forbidden from doing what Putin is doing himself and attacking Ukrainian forces. Why on earth shouldn't Ukrainians be able to attack Russian forces mustering on their borders? Give them those weapons, give them the attackers, give them the budget, give them the air defences that they need. It's the single best investment that we can make in the defence of the whole Euro-Atlantic area, is supporting Ukrainian heroes. We rely wholly on heroes such as the people who are here tonight with us from the Azov Brigade.
So Boris with the extreme Nazi Azov Brigade calling for attacks on Russian territory, which we've now got. And what is he doing? He's ramping up war and more war. It's just incredible. Alex, let's get on to another subject before we really hit Boris and what he's up to.
Well, Brian, if the Daily Mail is acceptable opinion for, and I don't mean this sneeringly, the lower middle class, that's how it's conceived of. The Times is thought of as the virtue signal and message signaling for the upper middle class, the managerialists. And here, in an opinion piece, and we know that in quality papers, opinion pieces are important, Robert Colville has laid his finger on a very important issue. It's not just about the issue of oil wells and the wider issue of fracking in Surrey, just south of London, nor is it about his partisan support for the Conservatives, which is moderate, but it is there, and you'd expect that of many Times opinion writers. No, it's the issue that he's constitutionally identified and given the useful name of meta-laws. What does he mean by that? Well, he gives us a definition. A meta-law is an overriding principle that becomes embedded within our system of government from which all sorts of consequences cascade. So he's talking here about a parallel between the Strasbourg ruling, this is the Council of Europe and its court there, the ECHR, which was a Swiss motion by some grannies who said we're being choked and we'll die of heat stroke by climate change and our government's to blame. The ECHR upheld their case and the Swiss have said at parliamentary level nonsense. He's drawing a parallel between that and the UK Supreme Court, as it's falsely so called, which has bowed with the wind coming from continental Europe, and this will reach the USA in time, and no doubt Canada already has, which is the idea that when local government bodies, in this case Surrey County Council, license, in this case, an oil well, they not only have to go by the secondary legislation and the principles of good government and all the other stuff, no, never mind what they're bound by statute, they're bound by great principles of international law. Such as not causing harm in undefined and nebulous ways by experts. So future environmental harm should have been weighed up. And Colville goes, he cited this, so we'll just go sideways and see what this is about. Reuters has covered this in the last week, that the Swiss parliament, to the shock and horror of the right-thinking journalists of Reuters, has actually bared its teeth at this and said the European Court of Human Rights doesn't have a business telling us to order our government to change our environmental and energy policy as sees fit, as they see fit, and that will be an end of the convention that member states of the Council of Europe always follow Strasbourg rulings. By the way, Britain, if the Tories do get back in, which is extremely unlikely, it may withdraw. We'll see what kind of stitch up Labour does in that regard. That's not the only one. The original in this genre was 5 years ago, 2019. In fact, a case that went back longer than that. But here is the equally badly named Supreme Court, or Hoge Raad of the Netherlands. It isn't really one, but it certainly had this ruling a few years ago with another group of grannies calling themselves Urgenda, saying that their government needed to be taken to task because they were not stopping CO2 emissions quickly enough and curtailing them quickly enough. And in this case, the Supreme Court ordered the government to attack the economy of the country in order to bring about a faster target. So there's plenty of this going on. Colville goes on to say that meta laws lead to judicial activism because they force courts to make essentially political decisions. That's the game here, of course, Brian. They also mean that government becomes ever more hemmed in by judicial constraints. So, in other words, without changing our constitution and what's left of it, the UK Supreme Court, aping what's being done in Strasbourg and Luxembourg, will go the political route and tell governments to find reasons to stop free trade and freedom of business and commerce on the basis that there is future environmental harm, much as children are stolen uniquely in Britain on the excuse of risk of future emotional harm. And I do mean that not flippantly. I think that Britain is uniquely cynical in this regard. So he's pointing out a number of problems that lead to meta laws overruling, and we'll just skip through this quickly. He's foreseeing what it means in party political terms when Labour gets in. Hint, they won't be able to build the houses they're pledging to buy because that's unfair on the environment. So Britain's the first common law country where we get these rulings. Even if we do withdraw from Strasbourg, our judicial class will now go this way. And no doubt at the federal level, the US will in the end as well. And just to show that this is coming out in the United Nations as well, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, gave this speech. That's the entirety of the speech on the screen. I know it's too small to read, but a brief remark the other day on hate speech. And here it is in the middle of it. He says that states have an obligation under international law, not defined, to crush hate speech. They must, all member states in the world must implement these commitments, and then he pays lip service to freedom of speech and so on. So these principles have seeped into the judiciary regardless of what clubs we're in as a country.
Yes, it's really worrying, Alex, this control from within the courts. Mark, let's bring you back on screen, because what better place to start talking about the Anti-Defamation League?
The Anti-Defamation League, along with the Southern Poverty Law Center, speaking of hate crimes and hate speech, good report there, Alex. Those two organizations have for many years been very hegemonic, you might say, in patrolling the airwaves, patrolling the news pages, looking for anything that it construes, the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center, as hate speech. They've taken it upon themselves to define hate speech for the rest of us. And so it's all the more interesting and all the more pivotal that now Wikipedia, of all places, politically correct, largely woke Wikipedia, is declaring the Anti-Defamation League as unreliable, as this headline shows, on both Israel-Palestine issues and anti-Semitism in general. And recall that we've had the video clip of a lady Israeli official who has admitted publicly that oftentimes, probably more often than we realize, the anti-Semitic specter is raised as a basically mental and verbal trick to deflect any legitimate criticism of the Israeli state, et cetera, et cetera. So this is even being reported by I-24, an Israeli news agency, as I'm showing here. Wikipedia's editors last week voted to declare the Anti-Defamation League, a New York-based Jewish advocacy group, as generally unreliable on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The word conflict, of course, is a bit off base. An overwhelming majority, this I-24 Israeli report goes on to say, an overwhelming majority of editors are also said to have voted to label the organization unreliable in the topic of anti-Semitism, which is ADL's core focus. That's its bread and butter. Dozens of Wikipedia editors stated that the ADL, quote, should not be cited for factual information on anti-Semitism as well, because it acts primarily as a pro-Israel organization and tends to label legitimate criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. And that's citing the Jewish Telegraph Agency. So that's one Jewish news outlet citing another. After formal declaration, the decisions will add ADL to the list banned and partially banned of banned and partially banned sources. ADL no longer appears to adhere to a serious, mainstream, and intellectually cogent definition of anti-Semitism, but has instead given into the shameless politicization, my goodness, at the very subject that it was originally esteemed for being reliable on, wrote an editor known as Iskander 323, whose request for a discussion ultimately led to the ban. Anyway, we'll move on from there. And this gets into sort of a side note that's relevant to what I'm talking about. Both these CNN articles were written by Kate Sullivan, the left one recently on the 20th of June and the right one on the 6th of October last year. And this is an example of the ADL at work. In one, Trump floats the Migrant League of Fighters in his latest dehumanizing rhetoric against migrants. And in the other, Trump's anti-immigrant comments draw a rebuke. And basically what the ADL and similar critics have been saying about Trump is that everything he says is nativist, white supremacist, and even reminiscent of Adolf Hitler's racial purity and Aryan theories. But in fact, that's not really what Trump has been saying, even though it's a good example, a textbook example of what the ADL's treachery is all about and the way they mislabel people. And in fact, the critics of the Anti-Defamation League will say that the ADL is in the business of defamation. Defamation is actually the core of the so-called ADL. And this is what Trump was criticized for saying. And this concludes my report for today, Brian. Trump said this: it's poisoning the blood of our country. It's so bad, and people are coming in with disease. People are coming in with every possible thing that you could have. Donald Trump, Republican presidential candidate. But the ADL and similar critics are saying that that comment is in league with Aryan and white supremacist and nativist sensibilities, when in fact, an objective look reveals that what Trump is talking about, even though it might be a slightly crude way of saying it, what he's talking about in terms of blood and impure things, he's talking about people coming over the border in large numbers with communicable diseases. So you can, in that dramatic case, Brian, how someone can be misquoted by the ADL, and it shows how much they misrepresent the issues.
Okay, troubled times, Mark, and we've got a little bit of video here, but just as an introduction, if we pop this one on screen. When I was having a look at people who were challenging the TV license, and of course this is money that the BBC gets here in UK, many people don't want to pay because they don't think the BBC gives value for money. They also think it's biased. But it was a really interesting clip where two police women turned up at a man's doorstep to tell him something. Let's have a look at this little clip.
Hello there, all right.
Is it Michael?
Don't mind if I film you there.
No.
I don't know, anyway, is it?
Is it Michael?
It is, yeah.
Okay. We've got something to issue you. Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Do you want us to do it here or do you want us to do it inside?
I don't know what you mean, issue me.
So basically, we've had a call from Thames Valley Police.
Oh, right.
So a different police force to us, to say that you've sent a letter to someone on the BBC.
That's right, yeah, we've been corresponding for quite a while, yeah.
Oh, right, okay. So basically, they've asked us to issue you the harassment warning.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So do you want us to do it here or do you want us to come
fine.
in? Here? Okay. So basically, it's for you. Your name and address is on there and your date of birth. You sent a letter to people which has been hand-delivered either by yourself or a third party. This letter is unwanted outside of the official channels of the BBC and has caused me stress.
Oh, right.
This conduct is contrary to the Protection from Harassment
She's never
Act
said that
1997.
before to me.
No?
No.
Oh, okay. So basically, this is a harassment warning.
Yeah.
Okay, which means the police have received an allegation of harassment against you.
I haven't harassed
Harassment
her,
is
though.
any behaviour on at least two
Yeah.
occasions which causes alarm or distress.
At
to
least,
somebody
sorry.
else. Harassment is any behaviour on at least two occasions.
I haven't been there twice.
Okay.
Yeah.
At this stage, the police are not commenting on the truth of the allegation. Instead, this notice is being given to you in spirit of crime prevention.
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
And to make you aware that if any kind of behaviour described were to continue, then you'd be liable to arrest and prosecution. You should be aware that if further such behaviour resulted in prosecution, then the behaviour complained of above could be referred to or relied upon in any subsequent proceedings. This notice is neither a court order nor a criminal record, but will be kept by the police for the purpose of any future investigations and retained in accordance with national guidelines on the management of police information.
So on the basis of one letter, there's classing it as
Yeah.
harassment. That doesn't...
Basically, it's not come from Essex Police. It's Thames Valley Police have received the information and they've asked us to issue it on their behalf.
But it does say two or more, yeah?
So on here it does, yeah. So I don't at the moment.
Well, I mean, I
It says
do know a
that
little
this is
bit
a letter,
about
so I don't know whether
harassment
you've
and
received
stuff.
Obviously, because she said that the contact's unwanted, we've just come
Yeah,
here
but
to
she's
say
never told me that.
we're here obviously just to tell you
Yeah.
that it's unwanted.
But if I could
Doesn't
write
get
to her and
anything
say,
further.
like, why didn't
Yeah,
you
but
say it before? No?
don't write, because obviously that's the allegation that is causing her harassment. So this is just us giving you a
So
warning.
could I do the same thing then?
Just to
Because
say, not to
her
contact her.
agents have been here a few times, and I've said you're harassing me and you're causing me concern and distress. I've said that to her.
Yeah, it's because obviously she's made the complaint, so we're just giving you a warning.
Right? No, but I'm
It's
just
gonna
a bit
stop
confused.
from
It seems
there,
a bit
okay?
one-sided at the minute because this has been going on for quite a while.
Like we said, we're not commenting on it.
Yeah,
That's
but
the
if I can
allegation
just
that-
tell you, so you know the other side of it, yeah? She works for the BBC, yeah, but she works from home. So when I phone up, they say, oh, she's working from home. So there's no other way of getting in touch with her. But if she's saying that, that's fine.
Yeah.
If
Well, we have to stop there because time limits on the news, but we'll bring that video into extra time. And I think there's a lot to be discussed. I was watching your face there, Alex, as you listened in it. They don't know whether it's true or not. And it's going to stop crime happening in the future. But
Yeah. The admission that it's nothing to do with law or the duties of a constable is we're doing this in the spirit of crime prevention, and the failure to uphold the law in accordance with the police oath, even the revised one 2005, which is all human rightsy, the failure to uphold that standard or to behave in that way is when they did not respond to the gentleman's question, can I do the same? Of course you can. And an officer of the law has every duty to say, it is entirely up to you, sir. And until very recently, police constables, even in Britain, in its depraved state, would do that. They would say, it's up to you, sir, to make such an order. But no, they just have the patter to deliver. Yeah, not really interested. Oh, really? Here you are.
okay, well, as I say, we'll have a look at the rest of the video and discuss that more in extra time. Now, I think it's back to you, Alex, here.
We're going to do a lightning tour around mostly Belgium, as I'm in that part of the world more often than not. But we'll start with Germany. Apollo News, and we'll immediately give an English translation offered by LifeSite here, both will be in the show notes, is reporting that Dr. Bianca Witschel, an old age pensioner, she's 67, has been sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in jail in Germany and struck off the medical register for 3 years and fined just under 50,000 euros. About the same in dollars or pounds, because of the 1,000 or so exemptions that she issued from COVID jabs and from mask mandates. And here's the shocker. In his explanation of the ruling, the judge claimed, quote, he's referring to COVID, we had an epidemic that was comparable to the cholera of the 19th century. And journalist Stefan Magnet replies, it's completely insane how this justice system acts today. I could furnish enough pieces to fill every UK column news episode with how mad the German judiciary is. It's not mad, it's deliberate, insane, as Magnet says. But that's the level of justice you're getting in Germany. On to Belgium. De Morgen, one of the main titles in the Flemish part of the country, says that 1,400 doctors, that is a lot for this country of a small population, have written an open letter warning that the collapse of healthcare is just round the corner, even though, despite the horrors of COVID and the number of deaths Belgium had in especially the care system, the Belgian healthcare system is less far gone than most of its neighbours, particularly less far gone than Britain. What they're warning about is that people are presenting at accident and emergency or casualty or emergency rooms more often than they used to, instead of going to primary healthcare via their GP or family doctor. Interesting that that's happening even in the least destroyed of the health systems in Western Europe. Stack Diary and a number of other sources have reported this too, have told us that Belgium didn't get the grand finale that it wanted because it's just finishing its 6-month rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union, which holds power over the Commission and ultimately over Parliament as well. This idea was put forward by Belgium because the member state in the chair every 6 months has to provide the initial draft of laws, but the member states met in the ministerial council could not get a majority to agree on it. What was the fuss about here? Well, Signal's boss has written, this will be in the show notes, to point out what's going on here, that Belgium wanted the EU to introduce upload moderation, a newfangled term for what used to be called client-side scanning, which is that when you sign up with any communication app or platform, you agree that it will be scanned by AI before it even gets uploaded to the site. And Signal is pointing out, and I know that EU civil servants are actually told to use Signal because it's secure and they won't get hacked by the Russians that way. Signal is saying there is no way of introducing such a scan without fundamentally compromising the security of our encryption. So this has been thought out spectacularly poorly. At the same time, by the way, and this will be in the show notes, though I don't have a slide for it, the Belgians are shooting ahead with their intention of having digital identity for citizens to communicate with their government, even though 3/4 of the Belgians surveyed on one of these things, so they didn't want it on their phone. What they've done instead, there will be another piece on the show notes in this regard, is provide people who are willing with what they call an e-box in their living room. And people are finding out to their horror that once you've got an e-box, you have to check the emails that come in on it, because that's the only way the government will issue you with a fine. The next thing you'll know is police will come to your door saying you were fined and you didn't pay because you didn't read what was in your e-box. So that may be coming to other countries soon as well. And finishing up the Belgian segment, this is from Het Laatste Nieuws, a more populist title, certainly lower market, I'd say. The Minister of Justice, Paul van Tichelt, was interviewed by a gentleman of Congolese extraction, and he was asked there, do you think that we can put an end to immigration in a country like Belgium? And von Tichelt got rather personal. You can see him pointing towards himself with his thumb in this still that I took, saying, if we don't even want to, let alone whether we can ban immigration now, because if we stop immigration, who'll be working in healthcare? Then he gets personal. Who will be doing my plumbing? And who will be washing my windows at home? To the absolute disbelief of the young black interviewer who suggests, is that all we're good for? But no, he's come out and said it now as this member of the governing Liberal Party of Belgium. Just finally, in the Belgian category, just for a snapshot of how far things have gone, the sex union, the Sex Workers Union of Belgium, basically the Prostitutes Collective of Belgium, UTS-OPI, trumpets in a press release that it has come up with this. It's gone through the Belgian Parliament with very little opposition. It's a code of practice, a labour law for prostitutes or sex workers, as we are supposed to call them now. They boast that there are all kinds of freedoms now, so that a prostitute always can say no to a client or a particular act that they are induced to do, and that they don't have to sit in those windows in a red light district if they feel threatened by anything. But look at this. If they invoke any such rights, if they say no to a punter or a John to our Americans viewers, then if it's more than 10 times in a 6-month period, the employer may seek governmental mediation. The only trouble there, Brian, is that the employer of a prostitute is actually a pimp. So this is a pimp's charter. Belgium has passed, with very little opposition, an agreement and a law which allows pimps to complain to the government that the girls they are turning a profit on are saying no to particular clients. You couldn't make it up, but they're very proud of it because it shows that regulation has won out and that sex workers are now fully protected by law.
Silence. Every time we think we've heard crazy things, there's something else comes along in the clown world. So I think we're going to have to leave it there today. Mark, I know you've got some border issues. We'll bring those into extra time. So we'll say a huge thank you to the UK Column audience. Thank you very much for joining us today. And if you're a signed up member of UK Column, please have a look at the pamphlet book, Your Life in Their Hands, and see whether you can buy one of these. It would be wonderful if every single one of the UK Column members would buy one of these leaflets, and that will be a tremendous boost for the column in what we can do from here on. So over to you on that. We'll be back in a few moments for UK Column Extra. Aside from that, UK Column News will be back at 1 o'clock on Wednesday. See you then. Bye-bye.